Maintenance window. The morning began with the soft grind of the refrigerator cycling and the sound of the upstairs neighbor stepping over that one loose board in his hallway. I was already half awake when the compressor came on. It always started with a low throat clearing and then settled into a hum I could set my breathing to. For a few seconds, in that slow slide through the last of sleep, I thought about the way the traffic lights on Hollow Pike held just a breath longer on yellow when the air was cold. I listened for the bus brakes 3 streets over and the sound of the bi-directional radio on someone's belt. Those little bursts of static that make a day sound organized. The refrigerator hummed on. The neighbor's footstep receded. I sat up because lying there pretending I wasn't awake never bought me anything. Stretch both hands over my head to feel which parts of my back had decided not to belong to me during the night. The window glass was cold through the thin blind when I turned my head that way. It was the kind of morning that put a crust on puddles just for a joke and no one laughed. I rubbed my face with both hands and blinked the gritty sleep out. The burn on my forearm was the kind you don't feel until you move. A hot sting, not deep. The way your skin speaks when something has just tried to write on it. I looked down, expecting to see the faint tracks a man can make without meaning to. Fingernails in half sleep, some hurry against a rough seam on a sheet. There were lines, red, not angry, but precise. They ran together in a tight cluster, and until the blood under them lifted, I thought they were the random heaped marks the mind isn't built to interpret. I touched one with the pad of my finger, and it complained the way a paper cut does if you show it interest. I rubbed with my thumb to see if there was any hope they were just heat-driven trickery. They held. They had edges that took my touch without turning the skin under them slick. They made a word. 4 letters, not uncertain, not weak. Watch. I had a mundane thought first, that I'd leaned in just the wrong place in my sleep, and the seam in the cheap nightstand had printed itself in me out of sheer boredom, or that the shirt I'd tossed on the chair had some protruding hard that had taken a liking to me in the night. When the refrigerator hummed into a higher tone because the compressor wanted to be important, I took it as a cue from the house to be an adult. I got up. The floor was cold the way wood floors are in late winter. A grateful cold, not a mean one. I stood at the window and lifted a corner of the blind. Frost had filmed the glass in 3 soft islands where your hands naturally want to touch. Outside, Hollow Pike's light made the early red on its own slack cycle. The smell rising off the radiator was metallic and faintly sweet, and behind it the apartment held that layered scent a place with a kitchen always has. Old coffee, rope of toast, the ghost of laundry. My arms itched. I let the blind fall. The mug I like is heavy and honest. I keep the chipped side to my mouth because it teaches my lip where the heat will be. The kettle sang thinly on the stove, and I turned our city's water into steam. I listened behind it for sirens because a day feels inside out if you've done it here 1 before 9 in our part of town. Steam, kettle, the refrigerator letting go of a higher note as if proud of having done anything at all today. I set the mug on the counter without thinking and made the ring I always make. The towel over the oven handle had been folded right last night, thirds and thirds. So when I took it to wipe the ring, it demanded to be unfolded in the way that feels like ruining something good. It smelled like the dryer downstairs, a fragranced sanctity I don't enjoy admitting I enjoy. I held my forearm over the stream of the faucet and rinsed the itch. The water made the scratches glow and then took their heat down to a complaint that felt obedient. Watch, I don't keep first aid in the house. Because I am a man who prefers not to prepare. It makes me violent toward a future I can't control. I patted my forearm with the towel and told myself nonsense in a sensible tone. You did this. You have hard nails when you forget to trim them. You caught the edge of the sheet. You dreamed bad and made it real. I dressed with the speed of a person who knows there is a window for panic early in the morning, and if you open it, everything else flies through. My job gave me a reason to keep a certain shape. I worked for the city Water and Power as a field tech, a menial name for a job that is really a string of keys and addresses and stairs that smell like damp rope. Some days I read meters in basements that have had the same humidity for 40 years. Some days I carry a fluorescent flashlight with its particular buzz past pumps that do the human act of labor without getting paid and without needing praise. My supervisor, Kellen, says my last name with the clipped kindness a man uses on someone he thinks reminds him of himself in the wrong decade. "Hale," he says, "we've got a lot, and we're not allowed to have a lot. You understand?" I do. We were not allowed to have a lot, not when old mains gave up like old knees, and the unmarked trucks on the highway brought spring down the valley in a set of 4 warnings you could smell on cold mornings. The handheld scanner lives on my hip. Its beeps are pitched too high, like the machine is both embarrassed and proud. I like the way it fits in my palm, the way it pretends to understand barcodes on the laminated tags in dark corners under stairs. It keeps a list of addresses I pretend matters to the city and matters to me. More and more, the list matters to a thing that doesn't live in my phone. The screen had a crack from before I was issued it. It made everything look a little bit older and a little less urgent, and in my line of work, that is how you forgive the hours. Hollow Pike behaved when I drove under it. The light made red for nothing, and then a truck surprised it and the green came so fast it looked embarrassed. The scanner did the greeting beep when I put it in the cradle in the office, our row of not-quite cubicles that smell like microwaves and grant checks. Kellen wasn't in yet. A memo on the board said a hydrant on Del Rook had been hit by a snowplow and the city would be digging. The word caution had been run off the printer without a black ribbon and looked like a thin truth. I took my stack of service slips from the tray and slid them under the clipboard, one of those little old lady motions that keep the day in from rolling off the table. They folded there with a satisfying whisper. "Watch," my arm said, where the cuff of my shirt rubbed. I scratched the itch once, deliberately, to tell my skin that yes, I had gotten the message. The first stairwell of the day belonged to a 3-flat on Dice Street, where the landlord moved things around every month as if an apartment building were a chessboard. It smelled like turpentine and rope and someone else's dinner past. The basement was a place the men in the building believed was theirs by right of fixing. But the women used it twice a year to look for a box of shoes they regretted and to switch out the jackets the building asked for by season. The steps were old pine and complained honestly. My light made a tremble down the corridor. The meter had been mounted at hip height 60 years ago by a man who wanted to be kind to the next one of me. Then the building had settled an inch and all the numbers had pulled down at a wrong angle. I knelt anyway. The scanner woke up when I touched the tag to it and made the 2-pitched beep. The numbers spun. 00784662. I typed with the thumb that knows, because that part of my body is the only one that has learned a job and kept it. I could smell cold iron and something old in the pipes that the city knows not to name unless you give people money. When I stood, my knee told me the truth of being the age I am, in a job that makes you older. The second address had the kind of dog that barks at basement doors, as if criminals live there. The third didn't a T answer, and the landlord would let me in when he got back from a fill-in shift, driving salt from the yard. The fourth was the old paper mill that had found religion and turned into a co-working space. They paid late and kept succulents on windowsills as if they could make a building forget its own lungs. The man at the desk wore headphones shaped like a machine for hearing ultrasounds. He pointed a thumb toward the back. The air changed to a drier depth, the way it always does when you walk into a room that admits daylight through bricks. By noon, I had 10 lines in my notebook, 10 beeps in my head, and one long stripe of unease under my skin. The scratch did not fade. It had gone soft at its edges into a pink that made the letters look delicate. I kept touching it because I am stupid. I kept looking for the place my hand might have caught. I looked at the chair by my bed as if it would assume guilt for the shirt that had nothing on it. I felt the old pull toward rationalizing something small into nothing, because that is how you keep your breath. The fridge hum is easier to live with than a word. At night, the weatherman with the 2 white teeth talked about a dry pattern. The apartment had that thin, brittle air where static visits and leaves the hair on your wrist rising like a field. I turned off the lamp next to the couch, and the dark was not a knot. It had a texture, like velvet someone had cleaned wrong. The refrigerator sang a small goodbye to the day. The neighbor stepped on his board. The traffic lights in my imagination held, "Let go." I slept. Morning, the same hum falling into place. The refrigerator's voice rises and then accepts. The heater ticks in the baseboard as if remembering a song. The stretch, the burn. I look without wanting to. A new word sat under the first in a hand my body had never learned. Wait. The letters ran smaller, almost neat, the edges more raised this time, as if whatever instrument had been used had taken its time. For a second, my breath took a holiday. I scratched around it as if I could relieve it by fixing something at the margins. Some kinds of fear carry trust with them. I still made the kettle sing, still stepped over the unseen crumb a person drops every day, still folded the towel at the crease it preferred. The water came out of the tap with a smell stronger than usual, a metal tang that made the back of my throat taste like an old coin. I ran it for a while because you are supposed to, then it went away. I held my forearm under the faucet and then made my palms hold the steam, because there are foolish animal pleasures you let yourself have when you have to be the adult later. I decided to catch it in the act, because deciding is what a man does to feel honest. I would stay awake and watch my own body and not fall for any of the tricks around sleep. I would be the guard in my own house. Work first. Watch, said my arm. Wait, said my arm. The scanner speeded in my hand. The barcode beeps of the distribution center ES small store when I stopped in for file folders sounded like a comfort thing, a chorus in a pitch that makes your heart stand still and then go on. The receipt, printed with the little edges on the sides and curled and fell onto the counter. I pressed it flat because I like to handle small paperwork like it matters. It read, 2 packs of polytabs, 1 heavy flashlight, 1 cheap. The numbers seemed domestic. My name there, misspelled like always, Hale. The clerk circled the total because it had to be important to somebody. Afternoon in basements, afternoon in stairwells that smell like damp coats. Afternoon with a landlord who wanted to talk to me about the city's laughable form letter, asking him to consider replacing his pipes with something not made from conquered trees. The scanner beeped through it. I wished my job didn't make me halfway into other people's kitchens. The refrigerator hum on other floors resounded in my head as mine, and I missed my old place because it is a luxury to miss anything benign. Home, kettle. I sat in the living room with the lamp on low and my feet on the table like a teenager. You can't decide not to sleep. You can only push the tremble. I drank coffee. I'm honest, I was trying to bribe myself. The traffic content online showed Hollow Pike in a list like a person reporting on a small town where everyone knows the light S name. Accident at the quarry road, lanes blocked, men in yellow asking the wind to let their signs stand. It was realer than anything else in my life. An arrow on a map, a color that meant you had to be careful around other people because they were going to be sad. I watched the clock. I sat with my forearm in my lap. The scratches had cooled into the skin, like something digested. The refrigerator clicked off and then on. I heard the elevator in the building next door. Time carried its coat across the room and wouldn't take it off. Wait, said my arm, and I did. Not because it told me, but because there is nothing else to do 2 in the morning. At some point, my face leaned itself in and I blinked longer and longer blinks, and when I opened, It was almost 5, and the refrigerator was on and then off, and my body felt like it belonged to the chair. I pulled my sleeve back with the aggressive neatness a man allows himself when he has failed. The sting was new and narrow, not a slap, but a scratch with intent. The letters ran thin and deeper, the red brighter for having got there with a point. He is ready. Under that, as if it mattered to someone, my name, Rowan. The line below it, to the right of the downstrokes, had started, a vertical that could be an L, could be the beginning of a 1. My mouth felt like something has scraped all of its water for later. I walked to the sink, as if that were the only thing left in the world anyone knew how to do, and drank from the tap without thinking, and tasted metal so aggressively my tongue moved away from the flow. I spat and then laughed, because the idea of dignity had left my life so gradually, I didn't know when. That day the city sent a message, boil water advisory. The language underneath was the language they learned to keep the city calm, out of an abundance until further notice due to a main break. The map showed a line of red that ran through my part of town like a slick the morning would later forget. It said, run the faucet for a minute before use and wait 2 minutes after boiling, and do not use for infant formula or immune-compromised individuals. And I read it all because rules are a net for a mind learning how to leak. Kellen called while I was reading the words I can recite now in my sleep and asked me to come in anyway. We got a stack, Hale, he said, and no one will do stairwell 17 since Cassis did her hip. They want numbers so they can pretend they're in charge of something. He said this without cruelty. It's how men like us talk. Tell the joke before it tells you. I went. My truck seat had learned my bones, and it cared. The windshield bore 3 sand scars that made the sun into a halo of cheap glass. The scanner woke and made its beep and felt like a friend because it didn't ask me what was written on my arm. And when I bumped it against my thigh, it made the scolding little sound it makes when you've dropped it and it's not sure whether to pretend to die. The list of addresses fed itself into my day. I went to a building on Westra where I'd have to push the door and then smile as if I meant it. I said morning to a woman I didn't know, and in the basement, the pipes sang a thin little high song as if the building were trying to know what weather it had. I held the key from the ring and felt for the tension in the lock that tells you whether the person who oiled it believes in permanence. I moved along corridors, in and out of other people's lives, the smell of warm laundry, the smell of paint, trying to do one last simple job. My arm wore its words like a teenager wears bracelets. Too many, too earnest. He is ready. Who? The brain makes shapes to throw terror onto, so that terror will feel close enough to be good for something and far enough that you can go about your errands. I imagined a man I had never seen waiting in a basement on Dice Street in a chair with his hands folded, as if anyone had promised him he'd be brought out when it was time to count. I imagined a child downstairs whose parents believed a toy could bless him. I imagined a dog at a door whose ears moved when I put my hand on a latch. I imagined all of them, and then laughed at myself because a thing written on the body by no hand is an old story, and we all like to think we renew. At the end of the shift, a K-graded worker from another crew told me their compressor had failed, and they had to shut a block down, and the traffic light at Hollow Pike had gone blinking yellow to teach the city courtesy for an hour. An old man at the counter of the supply shop asked if I could carry his box to his car because his shoulder had started to behave like a rusted hinge. I did. When he buckled his seatbelt, he reached with his left hand, and that told me which side of him had failed. He thanked me like a man who means it, to your chest, not your face. He put his receipt in the glove box, and I saw the other receipts there, 30 of them, unmade weapons for days when he needed paper to prove he had done something. His barcode beeps from checkout rang still in my ears. I might have believed in them if I had let them be. At home, the towel on the oven handle was askew, and I fixed it with the fussy motion of someone who believes a ritual is not a ritual but a necessity like winter boots. The refrigerator hum changed pitch, and I realized I could tell without looking when the butter compartment had been opened in this apartment because the mass of air changed. I was becoming the person who tests himself about his own machines. "He is ready," my arm said, and I thought of the refrigerator and said out loud, because I had been alone too long in a day now, "I know, me too." And then I laughed, because at least one joke per night belonged to me. I meant to sleep in jeans and station myself with my arm across my chest like a man in a cheap casket. I set my phone to video and put it on the table, cocked at my arm. I watched myself watch and turned it off 7 minutes later because I would rather have a villain I can name than footage of myself not doing anything. I boiled water for my teeth. The smell of coins had not gone out of the tap. I went to bed knowing I would fail and flattered myself that failure means you tried. In the morning, the sting was napalm small. I had dreamt of stairs that turned into metal ladders and then lost rungs, the rungs turning into little handles that wouldn't take a hand. I had dreamt of the traffic light at the bottom of the street, blinking every color, and then inventing a fourth. The new marks on my forearm had taken their place like people in a line. The vertical stroke I had feared had become a 1 and then a 2, and then the next line had become a K. The rest of the letters were ragged. The skin was red in patches, like a sentence a house would write if a house had an itch. 12K. The skin around the K was raised where the tool, whatever tool, had pressed without cutting. I had 2 more lines, letters being born underneath, an A trying to be an A, like a child practicing. I knew, with the kind of knowledge you earn against your will and then pretend looked inevitable afterward, that this would be an address. I didn't look up the block. I knew my day S-list by heart because I am a person who keeps names, even if I don't keep faces. Kingsfold was on the list not far from Dice. The duplexes with the little soldered fences and the pear tree that refused to die in the spot where the city had dug a hole 3 summers ago and asked people to call that hole progress. 12K didn't exist. Kingsfold didn't have letters. There was 12, one of the tidy ones where old women tend pansies with the kind of mind that forgives the winter for everything. And 12A, the one with the cheap landlord who couldn't leave well enough alone. And then 14, where the porch had a slope you could measure sorrow by. 12K. I drank coffee without tasting it because my tongue had gotten tired of being my tongue. I left the cup on the counter making its ring unapologetically. I didn't take the towel. I wanted to see that ring when I came home. The building on Coblin had had a posted sign since July. Do not enter, structural review in progress. The sign had wintered well. The stamp at the bottom said the city had signed one thing and the owner had signed another, and they had printed the word compliance in a proud bold like it meant anything outside the room where it was typed. There were 2 orange triangles on the curb where a crew had cut concrete and then gone home and not come back. The air near the stairs smelled like old rain and the long dry that makes cobwebs a thing you forgive. Kellen had texted, "Run 12A Kingsfold. Occupant says water tastes like skates. Bring the analyzer, don't." The rest cut off because our system is old. I hate our analyzer. It eats its own batteries when it gets bored, and when it reads chlorine, it always thinks everything's a pool. I keep a notebook because a paper that falls will manifest a sound that will tell a man to pick it up. Our devices are all polite and therefore rude. I went to Kingsfold. I walked the block with my hand on the scanner as if it were a person I was guiding. I stopped at 12 and put my ear to the pipe where the curb shut-off rises, because sometimes the city gives you a present and the sound is the tell. A white Honda was parked just wrong under the traffic sign. At the duplex, the outer stair had the wrong pitch, and I made my feet do their 2-step. I knocked, and the sound traveled inside like knocking on a plastic water jug. The occupant opened. Her eyes went to my patch, and then to my face, and then to the clipboard, and in that quick motion the day became one that had to be named. "It tastes like metal," she said, "and pennies." The sentence tried to be polite. "We got the text late." "I can take a sample," I said. "You could flush until it runs clear." "We've been flushing," she said. "My neighbor says it won't help." She didn't say what it wouldn't help, and those omissions are the things I think about when I look at ceilings at night. Everything smelled like clean lemon, a wrong lemon, a bottle lemon, but the apartment was proud of itself for trying. The kitchen light clicked in a way that made me think I'd see the bulb blackened if I took it down. Her faucet was new, her towels were not. The mug on the counter had a ring, and I made myself look away from it because I had not earned the right to clean another person's ring. I took a sample and put the analyzer in, and it flickered between numbers like someone had entered a cheat code for a game. "I can tell you there's air in your lines," I said. "I can tell you there's residual. I can tell you they're refixing a main at the bottom of the hill, and every time they turn a valve, your apartment becomes the lowest point in town." "We boiled," she said. "We all boiled." She was proud of her use of the correct tense, and I was proud with her because there are only so many ways to be proud now. I wrote numbers on the form, numbers that would find their way to a spreadsheet that wanted to be a story. The scanner beeped at me when I put the tag to it. The beep sounded like my name. I left the apartment with a good morning that rang like a cheap bell. At the curb, the tree put its dead leaves together like hands, and I said quiet thanks to a thing that has never needed and never will. At noon, the city sent another message. Extreme caution. Flush lines, boil. Kellen sent a picture of a map with red lines that made men in my job feel like heroes when really the red guided paychecks to 6 names. I ate a sandwich with too much mustard again, and the mustard offered itself as the only mercy the day had. Behind the break room door, the fluorescent light near the sink had begun to brown at one end, and the hum had climbed into a pitch that discovers the material of your teeth. My arm burned at the edges of the letters, the way a rash surfaces more when the room is hot. I scratched and then raised my arm into the air because adrenaline is a prankster, like a helper with a knife. At 2:30, I sat in my truck with the analyzer on the passenger seat and watched the traffic light on Hollow Pike doing its yellow shrug. 12K was written there, 6 days old in my mind, brand new in the place under my skin, where a man is supposed to keep his fear. I didn't go to the block right away, because avoiding is also a job. I drove to the city's warehouse to sign out a pallet of bottled water because it made me feel like a person who could put a thing in someone else's hands that might make their day 15% easier. The barcode beeps when the man scanned the pallet tickets made a song higher than ours. He circled my name on the copy with a dry pen. The receipt folded into my clipboard's back pocket with a whisper. In the lot, a forklift chirped and then complained. The operator tapped the battery level as if the display needed encouragement. It stayed where it was. He looked up and shrugged, and that was language enough. At the end of the shift, Kellen said, "If you can swing by King's Fold after, I'd be grateful in the way men are allowed to be grateful." I nodded. The light at the bottom of the hill did its slow breath and then offered green like peace. I parked with 2 wheels too close to the curb because it was that hour where your body tells you it has nothing left to concentrate with and then makes you back up to fix what you could have gotten right. I walked past 8 and 10 and 12 and stood in front of 12A and then turned my face toward the 3 steps down to the basement entry. The printed meter sign, laminated and stapled, had curled in on itself like a promise kept too long. I smelled bleach from a recent mop, old wet rope, shoe rubber ground into painted stairs. The stairwell air belonged to another century, and you live better if you let it. My flashlight buzzed softly, When I turned it on, because it was one of the old fluorescents the city bought when there was money, the meter rooms off the hallway had doors chained shut. Somebody in the building had loved their locks. My keyring has keys that don't belong to any place I've been, and I keep them because it appears someone thinks I shouldn't. The one that opens everything was the one we all have, filed down into a friendship with uncooperative doors. I slid it in and it said, yes. Under the stairwell, the first meter's face dust blinked blankly. The mouth of the pipe had a thread of rust where a leak had kissed and then left without making a date. I scanned. The beat made a little echo that called itself company. In the second room, someone had hung cloth on a line. It smelled like clean done proud, the way towels smell when they have resigned themselves to a building's air. In the third, a window that had never considered being glass now wore a plastic square hammered into meeting a frame by a man with love to give nowhere else. The fourth room had a hose coiled in a way the old men in my job approve of. The flat kind coil, no kink, the mouth facing down. The stains under the hose had an old ring, not my ring, a ring that taught me something. Water here had made a life for itself sometime last week, without being asked to. I put my hand on the pipe, and the vibration told me the building had a second heartbeat. The analyzer said what analyzers say. I took numbers. I made a mark on the slip that would save the person upstairs nothing and would help the city later when we made a graph to testify we had done what we could. On the way back up, my hand stopped on the handrail where it had already learned to live. The wood had taken oil from 40 years of men and women who have had to hold something to keep from falling into a stair they could tell by sound and smell and not by name. The letter K nestled in the skin on my arm, under my sleeve, like a thought you pretend you didn't think. Upstairs, at daylight again, the traffic light on Hollow Pike gave a red to a street without cars. My mouth tasted like a coin again, and I imagined I could smell chlorine in the air if I were allowed to be dramatic. In the night, the words on my arm swelled one last time, like a warning that is also a celebration. I woke twice because refrigerators hum at cycles they understand, and I had started to internalize honor for their timing. At 4, I gave up and sat by the window and watched an empty police car coast the intersection and then go on its way. The traffic light decided to be a 4-way stop because the power had blinked on our block. Out the window, duck-footed footprints from the last snow had stiffened into something you could put your thumb into and not feel warmth on the other side. The city was asleep, and it did not feel like the kind of sleep you can adore. In the room with me was the sound my own mouth makes when I clench, and I could hear it because I had stripped the world down to a volume I can handle. By morning, the scratch had become a sentence. The first line read, 12A King. The second, the rest had been written in a rush. It was less careful than watch and wait, less proud than he is ready, but more urgent, and it made itself into fold. The stroke of the L had gone down twice, as if the tool had stuck in the skin there and been irritated. There was a number on the line below, my own apartment number. Then another, the name of my street in the block font the city uses on signs from 30 years ago. To live through a thing like that and then wash a pan from last night. Essy dinner, as if the world had not poured itself into a different shape around you, is either heroism or stupidity or the same thing. I washed the pan because old dried sauce on a pan is an insult to every cook the city has failed to pay for their labor. I put it in the rack, and it made the gentle sound of china while drying. I folded the towel over the oven, and it made a soft thump against the steel. The refrigerator finished its hum and offered the little click of its thermostat choosing. I showered. The water smelled like dime and like a swimming pool at the end of summer. I told myself a thing you tell a child that you have no right to. It's okay. We boiled. I looked at the letters on my arm in the steam-hit mirror, and they looked like something a person had written with a mechanical pencil too hard for the paper. On the way out of the building, the stairwell light failed to come on and then changed its mind. The sensor has become my priest. It hears my confession once a day and grants or refuses absolution. The smell in the stairwell had taken on that laundry sweetness from the basement and some other smell like new rubber, like a hose extruding off heat in a stack. Mrs. Kemper, the landlord, had put a note on the board asking us to keep the door to the yard closed because the alley cats had been stealing meat from the neighbor Etch's grill. I was proud of her for thinking the note would change cats. The mailbox had a slip telling me something that had arrived for me needed to be picked up and brought a photo ID. I drove right past the post office because I had used up that part of my day my mind gives bureaucracy. The first call of the day on my route sent me under a bridge where a man in a yellow vest sat on a barrel and drank coffee from a stainless thermos. The river was thin and mean this time of year and looked like a glass someone had failed to rinse. The cement held a spray of letters somebody had stenciled there and had not signed. An old chain-link fence rattled against itself. My scanner complained when I dropped it into the seat, and I apologized out loud because machines deserve courtesy, and I had used up my store on human beings yesterday. By 10, I had been in 3 basements that smelled like the same furnace, 2 apartments where the same towel had been hung with the same incorrect fold, and 1 storefront that had turned into a church, and then a gym, and then a place to order small numbers of custom t-shirts. The person behind the counter had a laptop and a bowl, and a mug without a handle. The printer they used for receipts made a noise like tiny applause. Their barcode scanner didn't beep, and the silence felt like failing. The receipt had my name on it because the person had typed too fast and pressed enter. I almost told them to delete it because they had borrowed my name without knowing it. I left that, like most things, alone. Just before lunch, standing in a stairwell that had been painted the green everyone picks when they are tired of thinking, I understood something unpleasant about who might have written my arm. The tool that could have done it lived in my pocket, next to the pen and the screwdriver, a little meter tag spare with a corner that had learned 2 edges. A man could very easily reach for his phone in his half-sleep and pick that up and scrape his own skin on purpose he did not think he had. The thought made a prideful anger rise up in me. If it was me, how dare I? If it was not me, how dare anything else? The anger helped for 3 minutes, and then the ordinary day ate it. I had a hose to look at. I had to call Kellen and see whether Delrook S-Dig would produce mud where children would love to play in it. I had to eat a sandwich with the lettuce turning soft. At 1:30, after a stop on Archer, where the tenant had a way of eating potato chips that made my head fill with a sound like a television when the channel goes to snow, I turned the truck toward King's Fold with unpersuadable reluctance. The address I had seen in my arm sat on the street like a brick. It had weight and a handle. I wanted to pick it up and put it back on the shelf, but I hadn't built the shelf, and I didn't own the brick. There is a kind of good citizen a man can be. Go to the place. The scanner bounced on its lanyard against my leg and beeped when it hit the doorframe because it has manners I can admire. At 12A, the outer door had been left on its latch. The little black mark where the old wood meets the old strike would tell me who in the building has friends. The corridor smelled like curry and laundry. The stairs down like the generosity of bleach. The lights came on one by one, the slow photo start that turns the world from orange to not. I listened for the sound of hose water. None. I heard the tap of a man's shoe above, where he had placed it on a tile and reconsidered. The meter room door had its chain, and the chain had been unhooked as if someone had started to be serious and then had made a decision to live a minute longer instead. Inside, the hose lay as I had left it yesterday. The ring on the concrete under the spigot had not dried because concrete takes a long time to decide a thing is over. My light found the glint of a screw we had used to hold the laminate in the last decade, a thing we forgot in the effort to make better lives. The meter told me nothing new. The analyzer hummed a note into the air, and the air threw it back, and sometimes I think I do this job to hear echoes of a note I give it. The face of the meter had dust, but an honest kind. The kind that comes from a room not used and not punished. The writing on my arm hurt like learning. There is a bar at the bottom of King's Fold, where men who have finished their shift at the quarry pretend there is a season called Third Chance. Their laughter filtered down the stairs like men forgetting to be angry. I wanted to go there. I don't go to places like that because there is a kind of noise I need to hear and a kind I can't pay for. I stood with my hand on the rail and hated, for a clean, uncoiled second, the thing in the skin that had spelled this out. Address, name. I wanted to see a list. I wanted to see I wasn't the first on it and I wasn't the last. And then I wanted to take that wanting out of me and take it behind the building and show it what a hose can do when it is angry. Back in the truck, the light at Hollow Pike timed itself wrong for 2 cycles, and I had to explain to my right foot why it was allowed to wait. The refrigerator hum in my head measured where I had gone this week. I caught my reflection in the rear view, and I looked like a man who had spent his pride in thin strips on little daily achievements. The towels folded, the kettle stopped just before it shrieks, the receipt kept in a wallet just this once. I laughed again because otherwise you die. He's ready. I went to the bathroom when I got home and took the little spare meter tag from my pants and held it up. The corner was sharp. I pressed it against my other arm because a test is the first liturgy of men who think they have rational minds. The skin didn't take it at first. If I made the tool more cruel, it would. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I ran it lightly down my forearm, and the heat of the shower came back as a ghost under the path, and my skin said yes in a dozen little ways. That was enough. I dropped the tag into the sink and stared at it as if it belonged to someone else, and then realized I had no right to that separation. I put it back in my pocket because I have to. In the night, the whispering of the refrigerator became words I couldn't make out, my mind making gore out of electrical noise. I lay on my side and watched the traffic lights strobe a little red under my blind because the baseboard has a gap that admits knowledge. I dreamed of receipts printed with my name and an address that changed while I watched, and the paper curl in the printer head clicking the margin just so. I dreamed the barcode beeps in a pattern my hand knew, a song for people who have learned to lift boxes without making their back new enemies. I woke with the kind of ache behind the eyes you get when you haven't been allowed sleep for a favor, and you still thanked the person who asked. The next morning, the scratches ran lower on my arm, organized like a list. The first, the ones we know: watch, wait, he is ready. Then my name. Then the address I knew. Then 2 new lines, new and ugly and proud, my handwriting and not, numbers that made my street and then another street, not one of my calls, but near, the kind of near that makes you think of walking. The letters ran like they intended to be a neighborhood. The skin complained that I had made it work too much. I held my arm under cold water because cold water teaches a body where to hold itself together and where to let go. I dried with the towel and I hung it, and the hang was wrong. And I left it wrong because there are days you allow a building one misbehavior. My post office slip waited. The clerk had a mouth that went down at the corners in a way that looked like she'd learned young not to hope for a thing. She asked my name, and I said it, and she asked for ID as if she knew I had one. The box she brought back had a weight I recognized before I looked at the sender. Water and Power, City of Faircross, the journal book. They send these when their software pretends to keep data, but an old man in an office writes a note on a slip and sends you paper because your hands deserve to touch what you retallying. I opened it in the truck because I can't not. Rows and rows of boxes that ask a man to fill them so the last line can make a number into a story. Address, time, observation, sample taken, unusual. The first page had my name at the top and our office written twice. Once with the wrong number, once with the right, because the clerk had gotten distracted. The second page had a list of addresses, the ones I'd held, the ones I would and one I hadn't. That one was my address, written in the city's hand. I checked the bottom for a note. The bottom had a piece of kind tape on it, and under the tape, the word "watch" in blue ink that softened as if the pen had been asked to sit in water for hours. People like me go back to work when we have gone too far in one direction. Work is acceptable superstition. I ran meters with the anger of a person who has started to enjoy an indignity. The scanner beeped at the right times. The compressor behind the cooler in the co-op improved its mood, and the person at the counter told me it was because the man who knows poured oil into the right place, which is always a miracle to me. The children on Del Rook had left sticks in the trench the city had dug, and we had to pull them out because a stick under a pipe feels like weaponry, even when it isn't tea. I stopped for tea because I could not face coffee, and tea is a lie I enjoy telling myself. The cup had a cardboard collar. I kept the collar because it looked like a thing that had made itself useful, and I could not throw away anything that had tried. The message on my arm when I got home was new and trivial. A line with 3 numbers, the last a 9 that had been corrected from a 4 by a hand that did not apologize. I washed the dishes I had tried to leave so that I could prove to myself I was not the kind of man who puts off sponges. I turned the faucet and the water breathed, and the hose under the sink gave a little shudder like the apartment's throat had cleared. The refrigerator hummed with the small nobility of an old machine. I stood in the doorway and looked at myself in the glass over the stove, a reflection that always looks like someone else you could be if you did not try so hard. At 2 in the morning, not the upstairs neighbor and not a siren and not the elevator in the other building, a noise at the door. It was the sound of paper under a door. You can tell that sound once you hear it once. I went with that slow walk you teach your body so your footsteps will not frighten the thing you imagine behind the door. The envelope was the folded kind the city makes when it pretends to be federal. I opened it because of course I did. The memo inside said out of order, "Until further notice, stairwell light sensors will be turned off in properties along the Del Rook corridor between hours 1 and 4 due to maintenance on the grid. Use caution." The caution is always ours. I looked at the hall's dark and said, "All right." The scratch on my arm had begun to itch in that way that gets behind your eyes. I scratched above it. The skin smiled its odd smile. The braking began on a Thursday that felt like a Monday. The city had convinced the traffic lights to behave on Hollow Pike, and then a truck the size of a house came through, and the wires jerked, and then found themselves again. Kellen texted, 19. Harrow, flood in basement, go look at the shutoff. I went because people like me are sent into perishable places so that somebody else can say in a meeting we tried. The Harrow building is one of the brick ones set a little back like it doesn't care to be looked at. The door was propped open with a brick. The hall smelled like wet cardboard and older dog. The stairwell down looked like the 2-step into a bar I can't afford to enter. The light did not come on because the memo had told us it wouldn't. In the dark, the basement lived very quietly. I held the flashlight and the buzz filled the room in a way that felt like I'd given the space a second language. Water from somewhere, floor drain, old toilet, a pair of bad pipes in union made a delicate sound like a person putting a glass down on a coaster. The first few steps down my hand on the rail found dust the kind that respects itself. The switch near the door had been snapped off so many times it had broken where the plastic meets the metal and had that sharp rim that will put a line in your skin when your night lets you down. There were shelves, there was a mop in a bucket, there was a hose whose mouth rested in its own loop in a way that told me someone had loved getting that right. The shutoff wheel sat where it has for 80 years, painted the wrong red by a man whose grandson can't get hired now. I touched it. It moved. The water sound changed. I heard a deep knock from the pipe that sounded like the start of something important we are not allowed to hear. On the wall near the shutoff, someone had written numbers with a paint pen, like addressing a meter one time had called for annotation. The numbers meant nothing to me. The light shifted. Someone upstairs had opened the door, and a small rectangle of daylight fell down the steps and made a clean square on the floor, the same size as a casserole. In the square sat a leaf. It had ridden a shoe down and then decided to be the thing that made this day real. I put my hand on the wheel and thought, he is ready, without thinking it in my mind. I closed the wheel a quarter turn, because men like me are allowed to make gestures in a world that refuses grand changes. The sound of water made itself smaller. I put my hand to the pipe and felt that deep animal that lives in everything that is a connection in a city, the thing under the visible thing. Behind the sound of the pipe, a whisper that sounded exactly like words made of paper. I turned. No one. The flashlight buzz stopped for half a day in my head. The hose in its lovely coil smelled like pool and dust. When I stepped back into the stairwell, the light did its little gesture of acknowledgement. Upstairs, a child somewhere asked a question the carpet took. In my truck, the receipt I had saved from the supply counter stared up at me with my name spelled correctly this time, and the address line written over with the handwriting of a clerk. I don't know but respect, because he keeps this place from shaking itself to death on weekends. When I got home that day, everything in me had decided to sit down. The refrigerator made its long note and then took itself away. I poured water from a bottle into a glass because I did not want to taste metal again, even if the city had forgiven the Maine. I sat with my back to the couch, and the cushion did that thing of warming only where I allowed it to. I looked at my arm. The letters were asleep. The skin around them was warm. I listened into the apartment for a voice that wasn't mine and told myself the old truths. No one is in your home but you. If there is a voice, it is either the refrigerator making promises to a thermostat or your own tendon complaining about movement. I gave myself 20 minutes of being the kind of person who can live with background noise. At 10, the building's stairwell light did that pause and then came back. The memo had been right. The city had made a choice that affected how we walk on our own stairs. The smell in the hall had changed to someone else's dinner and cleanliness. I went out to get my mail and came back with the kind of flyer the neighborhood prints when it wants to feel like a community. Watch meeting at the center. Bring questions about the boil. Bring your own mug. I put the flyer down on the table and put my mug on it. I did not ask for a future that has mercy for nations. I asked for a future in which my mug can make a ring and I can leave it there until I choose to wipe it away. I slept an hour. I woke to the refrigerator's voice. I slept 40 minutes. I woke to the neighbor stepping on his board. I slept through a siren. I woke in that sudden way you wake when your body has had enough and does not explain how it means to handle you when it has. The new scratch had chosen to use a spot that did not hold muscle. It was tender, and therefore more obedient to whatever had asked it to be. It read plainly my building number. Under it, the word ready had gone thin and mean. I wanted my body back. I wanted to put my arm under water until the letters lifted like cheap tattoos. I wanted to hold my breath and count until all of it died inside me like a stupid party. Instead, I got up and boiled water because the apartment is the only government I answer to. It is the nature of stories I hate that someone giving a name to something makes it more real. If you let a person say there is a list, and that list has your name on it, you will begin to hunch as if something is about to land on you, and it will land and you will blame them. The list lived on my arm. The next word would be the word I refuse, the word that will tell me where we are going. Address. There is a kind of quiet that only comes when a man believes he has been located. I got dressed in the dark and sat on the couch of another part of my day. I listened to the fridge hum long. The window showed me Hollow Pike behaving itself. I drank water and I ate toast, because toast is the one thing that will not lie to you. I could tell you that I went to work and did the job and returned, and I did. But there was a stretch between noon and 3 where the addresses I typed into the scanner, little inbox, came up on the screen before my thumb hit a letter. Kingsfold, Del Rook, South Carpenter. The list of the day's work giving itself to me before my finger did anything to call it forward. On a screen that takes orders, that felt like a new arrangement of power. I watched my own thumb and my own thought and the little engine in the machine and decided the order had not changed. It had only felt like it. The analyzer swallowed a battery. The flashlight buzz made its own song in the hallway under someone else. Issy stairs while I watched the dust in the beam pretend to be snow. The compressor in the basement room hummed and then knocked and then hummed again. I leaned on it and promised my ear I would trust it. The barcode scanner at the supply depot didn't beep because the clerk had turned the sound off. The small courtesy he gave himself in a life with children, and I tried not to be panicked by that. A Tuesday, when the messages started, I had not noticed the smell, but now I did. My apartment held a faint line of copper under its normal Sunday. I turned the taps and let them run to the sound of brushing teeth just to hear the apartment get louder. The scratch on my arm warmed again. The edges softened from red to a color that belongs to old first aid. I wanted to tell it I got it. I wanted to tell whoever had written "He is ready" that I am not the he they imagine. That evening, before the light at the bottom of the street told my window it would hold yellow for too long, I went down to the basement to do what we call in our office general inspection. The words cover cowardice and curiosity and the cultural habit of making a new name for an old help so that we can bill for it. The basement had a new drip near the corner where the paint has never agreed to be anything. The hose lay as neat as ever. The bucket under the sink had someone's name written on it in a marker that had bled into the plastic and then stopped as if ashamed. The water in it, after a minute of motion, went still and showed the room back to me without the buzz of the flashlight because the flashlight had given up. In the reflection, for one unkind second, the letters on my arm read backward, and in that reversal I wondered if the message had been meant for a mirror. I lifted my arm to see if changing the angle would give me back my day. The water stayed itself. The letters stayed their new shape. The air smelled like what an old man calls bleach, and my generation calls wrong lemon. I went back upstairs because the apartment needed me. The next morning, the letters on my arm had softened to lines that would pass now as healed if the house had allowed itself a longer night. My forearm felt like a friend after a fight. I had the stupid thought that we were done. I turned the mug on the counter so the chipped side would greet me. I ran the tap and the city had something to say again. The first breath of silver out of the faucet with its chlorine logic and its old iron half voice. The refrigerator hummed with its little courage. I took out the bottled water and felt ridiculed by it. I put it back. I drank from the tap like a man who knows his place. My route pushed me west that day, out past the industrial fringe where the land forgets how to be houses. The water treatment plant sits out there with its shining low civic pride and its smell that tells your brain you are near something trying hard to make your town presentable. I had a call at the small station at Latch Road that keeps the pressure honest. It was the building men call modest and women call practical. Inside, the pumps talked to themselves in little sighs. The stairwell down to the valves had the good reverb you get in cinder block that has decided to be responsible. When I set my hand on the rail, the cold went into the meat and settled there like something invited. I stood at the bottom and felt the small eyes of all the dials look at me and not care. The walls had the marks from old workers, pencil heights from their children. A calendar from a year when the city had thought it could teach his people how to be proud, with pictures of old bridges. The hose on the wall had been hung perfectly. The rings on the concrete under the drip had been cleaned once a month for so long that clean had its own color. In the logbook, there was my name, my initials, my post-it note from 2 summers ago, Rowan Hale. Don't trust the third pump. Another initials, Kellen's, underlined because the pen had a flaw. The page smelled like machine room, paper that has lived with trace ammonia. On a page behind it, 2 months ago, someone had written, "Watch." It was faint and old pen, but it was there. I closed the book. It had been me, or it had been a man my hand loved. In the square of light on the floor, thrown by the emergency exit, a moth that had made it through a winter sat still with dignity. The last word arrived as red as everything else had not. Late on a Friday, when I couldn't decide whether to go to the corner store and buy butter for a recipe, I would not follow. I had boiled water for nothing because I was a citizen. I had cleaned a mug ring because I was a tyrant. I had listened to the refrigerator as if it were a radio station I could call and ask for a dedication. I had turned the towel on the oven twice because our hands forgive badly. I rolled my sleeve up and the skin stung in that relieved way it does when something breaks through. The line had been cut in with persistence. The letters said my address, every digit, every street name, Gale Arms, everything right, and under them the word door. Then a little downward arrow cut into the skin with the kind of casual I can only imagine belonging to a child, hand making pictures in fog. Observation is a discipline. I looked at the door. The paint had a shine where my hand lands to open it, and I'm embarrassed that my hands are so predictable. The lock I replaced when I moved in had the tiny nicks it does from keys learning a mouth. The chain hung. The screws were long enough because I had been a boy in a house where the chain wasn't a T and had been taught after. The floor between me and the door had a grit my sock felt. I picked up the grit because I am me, and then laughed at myself because I am that. I listened. The hall beyond made no suggestion of neighbors, no wind under the old attic door. The exit sign at the end flickered once in a deathbed gesture and then went back to light. I looked at the hole one of the kids down the hall had made with a truck on a string in the drywall last summer. I did not open the door. I did not open the door because the word had asked me to, and I am still a person who knows how to say not yet. I slept in pieces, and in each piece, I woke a man I thought I could stand. In the last piece, the refrigerator had gone over to silence the way an old person goes over to the chair on the porch. I woke to the absence. The light that sits on my wall through the blind from the street had a wrong shape. My body told me what kind of wrong. The traffic light on Hollow Pike had been blinking red for 30 minutes. I got up. My own refrigerator had stopped in an unproud way. The hum had been cut off, not finished. The kettle on the stove felt cold as a lost thing. The faucet gave a cough. The city had taken the power again for the east side maintenance they had promised since January. I went to the door because hunger is a kind of bravery. The chain made that soft clink. The bolt moved. The door stuck in the frame like old doors do in their season. I opened onto quiet. The hall smelled like nothing most of its life, and now it smelled like quiet had decided to be a thing. At my feet, an envelope, not the kind of the city uses, but a white one someone had bought in a box at the store, not sealed with a hand, that had thrown away the odd line the hard way and used it anyway. Inside, a page torn from a journal book, the Water Department S kind, with my address written at the top in a hand that has lived with blue pens in winter. Under it, my name. Under that, in a line that looked too light to be ink and too dark to be pencil, the word ready in miniature. There was the ring of a mug on the corner, a ring familiar, but that could belong to any of us. I closed the door. I sat with the envelope and watched the refrigerator be a quiet black rectangle. I listened for the traffic light to find a routine. It kept blinking. The scratches on my arm had cooled entirely. They felt like a memory you learn to tell the way you want. The kettle would not sing until the house allowed it. The sink asked me for patience, and I gave it because there was no alternative that left me a person. In the window's rectangle on the floor, dust settled like it didn't have a job anymore. I held up the letter and watched the paper's edges throw a little light back. I put it down and moved my mug so the ring would make a circle that met the old one. I picked up the towel and placed it under the mug, not because I needed the surface protected, but because the towel needed a job, and because I was not yet ready to open the door. The power came back at dawn, the way the city has learned not to boast about. The refrigerator sighed itself into life. The traffic light behaved. I sat there with my forearms and the blood under them and understood that I had seen something about the way my life is made, and it is made in small arrangements that can be written and rewritten, that a body will tell a story when given the air to, that the hum and stop of machines can be a language you learn without pride. The last word was an address, and it was mine, and there was no telling what it wanted from me except attendance. I went to work. There were hydrants to paint, there were sample points to label, there were addresses in the scanner that gave themselves bright, I could swear, before my fingers asked them to. Kellen told me a story about his daughter's sleep and window lights, and in it I heard a question he didn't know he was asking about waiting in the dark. I spent an hour in a stairwell that smelled like everyone's wool. The fluorescent at the end of its life made its own static. The compressor behind the cooler clicked itself into a cheer and back out. The barcode beeps at a corner store rang like applause when a man carried his groceries as if he had been granted the gift of weight. The receipt that came out said nothing dangerous. My name was the spelling I prefer. At home, the towel had dried itself into a little stiff. I took it and offered it to the sink's work, and it softened like something forgiven. I made tea. I pretended to forget about letters and skin. I carried the mug to the socket where the couch reaches under the table, and for the first time in days, I set it anywhere without thinking. The ring it made on the wood looked like most of the circles in my life. Confident when new, then fading by half after an hour, then a faint on surfaces that resent being asked to hold. I stood, and I went to the door, and I slid the chain aside, and I felt my heart behave. I opened, and I stood in the hall where the exit light had become my friend. It hummed. Light on walls isn't a language, but sometimes it is the best we are allowed. On the back of my left hand, which has never been aspirational about anything, a small phrase had appeared, the work of last night, or the night before, or the morning. Try the basement. I laughed, because terror that wants to be loved becomes a brother. I went down. The light came on. The buzz made the whole length of the stairs think together. The hose lay exactly as a hose should. The wheels on the shutoff were open a quarter turn from what I remembered, and I felt the old anger at being corrected by my own ghost, and then the old humility, because this is how the water gets told to get better. On the wall, in the calculator pencil I had used a month ago, the shape of a finger had run a long mark down the paint, then stopped. I set my hand near that mark to see if a body could fit where other hands had, and it did, because a stairwell is made for this. I live in a city that will take the power to fix a line and ask me to be gentle to my stairs for a while. I live in a building where a towel accepts the day's sins and dries and makes no comment about some. I live with a refrigerator that sings when asked and rests when allowed. I have scars on my right forearm that read as words if a person wishes to make stories, and read as healed scratches if a person wishes to live in an apartment and go to work. I took a pen because I am not noble but not nothing, and I wrote on my left wrist in a small, careful, watch. On the inside of my elbow, wait. On the soft, where the blood comes close, he is ready. I put my sleeve down. I turned the mug so the chip would meet my lip the way it should. I looked at the door. The sticker the city had left about light sensors peeled at the corner, and I left it there because I have learned to allow small exhaustions. I sat, I listened for the traffic light, I counted the refrigerator hum. I put my hand on the place on my arm where a person with a job cannot be told any longer what he is supposed to do next, and found it warm and behaving, and let the city talk to itself around me like it always has and like it will after I stop.